Welcome, Tony, and welcome, everybody. By now, you will have worked out that we've had some glitches and we weren't able to do this event live, but I am fortunate today myself to be talking to Tony, and we thank you all for joining when you're watching this. Now, my name's Karen Whiteside, and I'm the Library Programs Officer for Moreton Bay Region Libraries, and I'm very happy to be hosting this interview with Tony Park as part of our Meet the Author events here at Moreton Bay Region Libraries. Now, before we get to the interview, I'd like to first pay my respects to the traditional country we're all joining together on in Moreton Bay. It's variously Gubbi Gubbi, Turrbal and Jinnaburra people ground, and I'd like to pay respects to the traditional custodians and elders, both past, present and emerging. Moreton Bay has had a long history of storytelling, so many have gone before us, and we're very fortunate to be part of that tradition today. Now, due to us not having a live audience, I am not going to be able to throw to audience questions, which is a bit of a shame, but we will be happy to take your responses after we post the event on YouTube. Now, I will introduce Tony. So Tony is the author of 18 novels set in Africa and 6 non-fiction biographies. Tony has worked as a reporter, a press secretary, a PR consultant, and a freelance writer, and he has also served 34 years as an Army reservist, including a stint in Afghanistan in 2002. Tony and his wife divide their time between Sydney and Southern Africa, where they own a home on the border of Kruger National Park. Welcome again, Tony. It's great to be speaking to you, although sadly it's not in person. How is lockdown treating you?
Karen, thanks. I think the definition of an optimist is an author who plans a book promotional tour 2 years in a row in the middle of a pandemic. So I would have loved to have been there in person, and it would have been one of my first events for the launch of Blood Trail. So like everybody, I've had to adapt and hopefully overcome. But, you know, as I've explored in the books, I mean, I am still a bit of an optimist, because I think in some funny, strange ways, not being able to connect people has, if you like, forced us to find other ways to connect and maybe even reach out to people that we might not have seen or spoken to that often.
Yeah. And that is true. And so, you know, as you say, you're an optimist. That's great. Now, let's go to the questions. So perhaps we should start with your new novel, strategically displayed behind you there. Mm-hmm. I myself am really looking forward to the return of Sannie van Rensburg as a central character. You've written quite a few novels where Sannie turns up as a peripheral character. So what about this story made you want to bring her back?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I didn't have any grand plan to bring her back in this one, because like with my previous books, I just think of a premise or an idea and I start writing. And this was going to be a book in which the other lead character, a safari guide tracker by the name of Mia Greenway, was going to be the lead, and she was going to encounter a crime which took place during a live lockdown webcast of a game drive in the Kruger National Park, where these things were really happening for a lot of Africa addicts like myself. There was a very good streaming service called Safari Live, which was broadcasting live game drives from a few different reserves in South Africa, where people could log on at dawn and then log on in the evening or at the appropriate times and watch through a camera driving through the African bush on a game drive. It was fantastic. And so I had one of these what if moments. What if they were doing one of these webcasts and they came across a poaching incident with someone trying to kill a rhino? And I thought, well, Mia will be quite capable and she'll be able to, like a true amateur sleuth, be able to solve this mystery and work out what's going on. But I worked out very quickly it was going to be quite a complex story. And so I needed I needed the police to get involved because there was going to be a subplot about some children that go missing, kidnapped. And what happens, what I like, particularly when I was writing my early novels, is I like the idea of a blank canvas. I do like starting a book with fresh characters, with a whole new story, and that is really rewarding. But because, as you mentioned, I've written 18, this is the 19th book, in this kind of fictitious world that I have created, I have a kind of a crew, you know, I have a cast of characters. So if I need a cop, I've got one, you know. And so Sonia van Rensburg did first appear in a book called Silent Predator, which was my fourth book, I think. And she was kind of the leading lady in that book. And then, as you say, she's popped up every now and then over the years when I've needed a capable detective to be on hand. But I always had a soft spot for her. I think it's fair to say that she was quite possibly forcibly elbowed or kicked out of the picture by another female character of mine called Sonia Kurtz, who's a very forceful person, a recently retired mercenary, and she has stolen the limelight in a few books because she proved to be quite popular with a few readers. And so I think Sonia van Rensburg has been waiting in the wings, and I do like her. I think she's an independent character. She was a single mum when we first met her. She's gone through some very trying times recently, and she brings a lot of key qualities: strength and resilience, intelligence, and a real kind of sense of right, you know, and a sense of moral justice to herself. And so I thought she would be the right person to come back in this book, and I think it's probably not before time.
That's fantastic. So another thing that's really interesting about Blood Trail is that it deals with magic and how belief in magic can govern behaviour. So can you tell us a bit more about the part belief in magic and superstition plays in the novel? And how did you come to select this as a theme?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I wrote this one all during lockdown last year. And so, you know, my gig, my story is that I am the Australian who lives in Africa half a year and writes books set in Africa. And I go on and wax lyrical about how I draw my inspiration from the African bush, and I'm sitting on my stoop in my house in the game reserve and I watch the elephants and the giraffes walk by. Well, you know, that's not possible when you're in the spare bedroom of a 2-bedroom flat on a 6-lane highway in Sydney. So I had to come up with something else. And I had a conversation over a cup of coffee a few years ago with a lady I know. She's an academic who was engaged by the South African National Park. She started as a botanist, and through her time in botany, she became involved in researching the efficacy or otherwise of various plants in African traditional medicine. And traditional medicine is provided by traditional healers known as Izangoma or Sangomas, and they have a role as healers, and they do use a lot of plant-based remedies, you know, which have, you know, certain properties and efficacy. They're also involved in the business of belief. I shouldn't say the belief, in people's belief systems, because a part of traditional healing is very much tied up with the intangible, with people's beliefs. And so my friend was telling me that she had been involved in research with looking at the use of traditional medicine. If you want to call it witchcraft, just for the sake of simplicity, it's probably not the best term, but the use of spells or talismans, certain preparations that could help people in their day-to-day life. And as I had already learned, poachers involved in the illegal hunting of rhinos, killing rhinos for their horns, which are marketed in other parts of the world, ostensibly for traditional medicine and traditional beliefs in parts of Asia. In reality, rhino horn is more of a commodity. It's a valuable substance, so it fuels a highly organised, very lucrative illegal trade. But what I had learned was that poachers would go to their traditional healers and they would buy spells or talismans or amulets that would help them in their hunting, you know, based on ancient traditional beliefs, but also protect them, and that you could buy umuti, which is magic, which would make you disappear. So if you're being chased by an anti-poaching ranger from national parks, or a policeman, or a soldier through the African bush, because this is a war that's being fought, you could use your potion to make yourself disappear, or turn into water, or perhaps morph into an animal, or your magic would confuse the people following you. Now, when you say that, a lot of people, particularly me, if you're a middle-aged white male living in Australia, a lot of people's initial reaction is say, well, this is rubbish, superstition. Now, as this academic explained to me, and she introduced me to another person, a guy who was studying this field as well, I learned a couple of very interesting things. One is that it's not just confined to the poachers. The people on the other side, the rangers and the military people and other people hunting poachers, will go to the same healers looking for counter potions to improve their chances of not just survival but catching people. So there's what one academic calls an invisible arms race going on in Africa, with both sides using magic to try and improve their cases. Again, you might think this sounds silly or superstitious, but as a military person, I know, and it was pointed out to me by these two researchers, that it is not uncommon. In fact, it's very common for, say, soldiers or airmen or sailors involved in war to have certain rituals that they believe in, good luck charms, the old rabbit's foot, rituals that they will do before going into battle. It drifts close to religion, but we're not necessarily talking about religion, because the poachers and the rangers that ascribe to traditional beliefs and medicine in Africa are, in the main, certainly where I live, also devout Christians. So if you take religion and religious beliefs out of thing, the key is that people in what is known as high risk, high reward activities are very likely to follow certain rigid beliefs. Now, the interesting thing is that it's when you hear about this, the more you start thinking about it, the more you start realizing it's true and there's something to it. I'm writing a non-fiction book at the moment with a 97-year-old guy who served in the Second World War. And he was a gunner on a Royal Australian Air Force Liberator, flying out of Darwin and going on bombing raids over the Japanese-held islands in the Pacific. He and his crew had a ritual. He contracted a very bad head cold during the war and should not have flown, because these were unpressurized aircraft, and he knew that he could do some serious damage to his sinuses and his hearing if he flew. But he had to fly, and he discussed with his pilot and his crewmates whether he would fly or not, and they expected him to fly, and he said there's no way he wouldn't. Now, the reason he did that, knowing full well that he was going to suffer, was that they had observed that on bombing missions, the crew that flew with a replacement member was more likely to be shot down or involved in a crash, or to lose a man, or to be lost at sea. So these are rational, intelligent, educated, professional military people to make the decision that he would fly. And he ended up half dead, literally half dead. Fortunately, after that mission, when his sinuses exploded and expanded, they went on leave, and so he was able to spend his leave time getting medical procedures to try and fix his hearing, which didn't work, but he kept on flying throughout the war. Now, that is how strongly people will hold beliefs. And just one other quick funny one the academic told me about is that cosmonauts, Russian cosmonauts going to the space station, will always have a Wii on the vehicles, on the tires of the vehicle that drives them to the launch pad. This is documented apparently. And any foreign astronaut from America or the UK or Europe that wants to go to the space station has to Wii on the wheels of the truck that drives them to the rocket. Otherwise, something terrible will happen. And it sounds funny. And on one hand, we can say it's superstition or whatever. But the key that was explained to me is if you're in a business that's high risk, like a soldier or a spaceman, or even a sporting personality who wears the same underpants every time he or she plays, you stick to these rituals because the reward is high, and to do so might jinx you or curse you. So that's a very long explanation, but these belief systems, as I said, the temptation is maybe to dismiss them, but the more you think about it, the more validity is to this.
It's just absolutely fascinating, isn't it?
now leading on to something that you were talking a little bit about with the magic and the poaching. So conservation and the impacts of poaching are very important story elements for you here too in Blood Trail. And they're themes that you've covered quite a few times in your novels and also in non-fiction. So this is obviously something that you are quite passionate about. What do you think can be done to improve the situation in Africa with regards to poaching?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I wasn't really someone who was particularly interested in the environment or wildlife or anything until I went to Africa in 1995 when my wife and I went on what was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime safari holiday and turned out to be anything but, because we got hooked and we wanted to keep going back to Africa, and we did, and now we live half our lives there usually. And of course, along that way, I started writing and I started learning a lot more about the plight of animals such as rhinos and elephants and pangolins, and also in my last book, Last Survivor, plants, because the illegal trade in wildlife and environmental products is certainly not restricted to animals. It's birds and reptiles and plants and everything. So it comes down to greed at the end of the day. It comes down to money. And if you look at the biggest problems, it seems to me that the problem in Africa is not just about Africa. It's not just about the countries that I write about. It's everywhere. And in particular, it relates to Australia, pretty well everywhere on the world. It seems to me that while money is the root of all evil, the bigger problem has to do with harmony, being able to live in harmony with the natural environment. Now, as humans, we have an enormous footprint on the world. We need to eat, we need to go about our business and build our cities. But I'm not the only one who believes that the number one threat to wildlife and the environment today is habitat loss. Now, whatever causes that habitat loss, it's habitat loss and the inability of humans to live alongside nature and to live in harmony with their natural environment. So that's certainly manifested itself in Australia, where if you look at koalas, for example, they're not hunted, they're not poached. Well, they used to be shot for their fur, but the remaining koalas we have, the number one threat to them is a loss of trees and a loss of habitat. Now, I'm not saying I'm anti-farming or anti-development or something like that, but we have to find a way to live with our natural environment and our wildlife if we still want it to be around in 5 or 10 or 100 years. It's exactly the same in Africa as well too. Poaching is a problem. The commercialisation of wildlife is a problem. But at the end of the day, there would be an awful lot more rhinos and lions and elephants around if there was room for them. And so, as an optimist, I do see signs of progress. In my time of living in South Africa and travelling in Africa, there have been a number of new national parks proclaimed, particularly in South Africa. These are old farming areas that have been rewilded, if you like. If you look at countries like Namibia across the border from South Africa, there's been great progress made with encouraging what are known as conservation areas rather than strict national parks. So rather than putting a fence or a boundary around an area of land and saying animals here, people there, they've moved to more of a model that says, how can we make it easier and fairer and safer for people and animals to live together? It requires give and take. In Namibia, it requires farmers accepting that they may lose some cattle to lions, but those lions are going to provide income and jobs and employment by bringing in tourists. It's a very fine balancing act as well too. A lot of it's about education as well. So fundamentally it requires, I think conservation requires a change in everybody's mindset, from the way we look at the bush, the way we look at property, the way we look at wildlife and the value of wildlife. And I've tried to get across some of that in the book as well, in the books in general.
Right. So another of the things that I've enjoyed about your books is the strong female characters. So is this something of a strong, like a conscious decision on your part, or
or unconscious? And have there been some real life women who've inspired you in this regard? The characters modelled on women that I guess.
I don't think they're not modelled on any particular people, but it's just a fact of life these days that in the course of my business of writing, I have some very strong women in my life, my wife and the first people that read my books are my mum, my mother-in-law, and my wife, and my publisher who's a woman, and my editor who's a woman, and the copy editor who's a woman. So trust me, the first guy that reads this book other than me is probably the first one that buys it in the shop. So I get plenty of frank and sometimes fierce feedback as well too. But one of the things I like to tell people who are interested in writing is write what you know, but write what you're interested in, what you like to read. I kind of, for some reason, have been drawn to books with strong female characters. I'm a big fan of people like Ken Follett, who also made a point of having very strong, independent female characters. And it's a fact, which I didn't know when I started writing, but it is a fact I'm told by my publishers that the majority of my readers are women. Now, some people would look at the covers of the book or hear the description and think, oh, this is a boys' book, action, shoot 'em up. Well, that's pigeonholing and stereotyping, So I'm not writing for an audience, but I am drawn to it. And I think the interesting thing about Blood Trail is, quite often I will have the male lead and the female lead, and surprise, surprise, they may end up together at the end of the story. This one is probably a little bit different in that the buddies, the buddies that team up to solve the crime and win the day are both women, and they come from different backgrounds. They come from different points of view to this problem. So I certainly don't see a problem with it. So I think that's the sort of books that I'm kind of drawn to as well. In the field of conservation, I do come across many women in key roles, particularly in the research side of things. Mia is a female safari guide in what has been a traditionally male-dominated industry, and to put it in perspective, the safari industry, I think it's fair to say, I'm not insulting anybody because they'll probably take it as a compliment, but probably within my time in Africa earlier on, it was not only male dominated, it was the place where the alphas of all alphas would go for jobs, and they were in the main handsome, strapping young fellows all trying to outdo each other with how clever and handsome they could be. So that industry has changed, like a lot of industries. For the better, and a friend of mine recently attained the position of field guide of the year in South Africa a couple of years ago. A big feather in her cap as well too, not just because she's a woman, but because she's a very good safari guide and a very good tracker. So I was helped by people like that. There's a woman by the name of Taylor McCurdy, who is one of the drivers on the Wild Earth Safari Live game drives, who read the manuscript for me, shared with me some very incisive and quite funny experiences she's had as a woman in this male-dominated industry. So I think it's good. I think it's good to turn a few stereotypes on their head every now and then. And so, that's the sort of, it's all. But again, Karen, I don't really know this when I start writing. It kind of just takes on a life of its own. Detective Van Rensburg comes back into it, and before you know it, and instead of a hero and a heroine, we've got two heroines in this story.
That's great. Now, I'd love to hear about how you came to write your first novel. So, and whether you'd always planned to be a writer. Did you see yourself as a novelist, or was it something that just kind of evolved?
Without a doubt, the only thing I wanted to do from as early as I could remember, from the time I was a little kid, was to write a book. My mother was and is a voracious reader, and she introduced us to reading at a very early age. And we would spend after school time, when my parents were both working, we would hang out in the local library in Campbelltown, where I grew up. And so I was always surrounded by books, and I thought to myself, someone must write these books. And so I wanted to write a book. I used to read the Biggles books, terribly unpolitically correct these days, but that's what I started reading. And they were about this British fighter pilot / sleuth who would go around saving the world. and written by a former fighter pilot, Captain W.E. John. So not only did I want to write books, I wanted to be Captain W.E. John. So I thought I would like to be a pilot/author, preferably in the Air Force. Unfortunately, as soon as I was old enough to read and write, I worked out that I couldn't add up. So I was never going to be any good at maths or science, which therefore pretty well knocked any hopes I had of being a pilot out pretty early on. So I pinned all my hopes on being a writer. It's not so easy to wake up one day and say, I'm going to write books. And there will be plenty of people out there who will tell you, as with anyone following a dream, a lot of the time, there's always a lot of people who tell you why you shouldn't do something. But this was something I always wanted to do. And I stumbled into a job in journalism, which I loved. That turned into a job in public relations, which I also liked. But I had always harboured this dream of writing. So to cut a very long story short, in my 30s, I quit my job, tried to write a novel, wrote a novel, failed because it was no good, and then started travelling to Africa where I had another go, and I wrote a novel that got published. And so and then my publisher said to me, you can write the book set in Africa. And here I am 19 years later, still writing the book set in Africa. So it seems to have worked. So.
So was there anything that's really surprised you about the publication of your first novel?
Yeah, I was surprised it got published. No, it was a really interesting process because we can talk about it a little bit later on, but I started writing in a particular way, following certain rules and regulations about how you were supposed to work. And I found that while I had taken the time, with the support of my wife, Nicola, to leave my job and go and try and write a book, with her supporting me for 6 months, I felt incredibly privileged, but I didn't actually enjoy the process. So there was something wrong. And I think, looking back on it, there were a couple of things wrong. I was writing a book set in the outback, and I had not been to the outback, but I was writing a book set in the outback because I thought people overseas would want to read it. Well, that's another mistake. I was writing for an audience I didn't even know. And I was following certain procedures that didn't really fit with me. So it wasn't a particularly enjoyable process. When I started writing the book that got published, Far Horizon was my first novel, I was doing it in a location that I was growing to love. I was falling in love with. I was writing about things I was passionate, like elephants and conservation and poaching. And I was enjoying the actual process. So I can honestly say that I enjoyed that process so much that after having taken a knock first time and not getting published, I would have been happy just to keep writing. You know, I think that to be published was a dream, but I think my dreams have become a bit more grounded. And the fact that I was published really changed my life. The book was delayed in publication, but published the year I turned 40. And it's fair to say that my life began at 40, I think. It certainly changed my life. And I consider myself incredibly grateful to, I write full-time, it's my full-time job, to have a job doing the one thing in life that I love, other than my wife.
So what you just mentioned before about the process, that leads in beautifully to my next question, which, as I said, we asked you last year, are you a plotter or a pantser? So yeah, was it discovering that you could be a pantser? Was that really what helped you?
Yeah, and look, I'd had no training other than having worked as a journalist, which doesn't particularly equip you for writing fiction. I didn't know what to do, so I bought a couple of books to read about how to write a novel, and they both said you have to plot. The two books I happened to pick up both said this is how you do it. You have a plot, you have your list of characters, you know who they are, what their names are, what their history is, you have little files on them, and you have a chapter breakdown, and then you fill in all the gaps, and there you go, you got a novel. Well, it was a mechanical process. And one of the things I didn't like about it was that because I had plotted this first novel, was I knew how it was going to end right from the start. So there was no intrigue or mystery or entertainment for me. It was like a process. It was a process, a very process-driven kind of thing. And you know, I still say today, I mean, if anyone reads that book, they'll know how it's going to finish after the first page. But I think about it, it's just incredibly predictable. But when I wrote the second book, I started with a blank slate, and I thought, I don't know who the characters are going to be. How can I know who characters are? You know, you meet people in life. You don't know what their backstory is or what motivates them. So I just started making it up as I went along. And I subsequently learned you're allowed to do that. And it has a name called pantsing, writing by the seat of your pants. There's a very good book that I follow, a book called On Writing by Stephen King. If anybody out there is interested in writing, it is, for my 10 cents worth, the best book ever written on how to write. And in it, Stephen King says you can plot, or you can just write by the seat of your pants. It's whatever works best for you. And I would say of my author friends, because I know a few authors now, I would say probably about 70 to 75% of them plot, and the other 25, and I'd say 20% make it up as they go along like me, and there's probably 5 to 10% in the middle who do a bit of both. There's no shortcut and there's no silver bullet, because the time that I would spend on plotting, I subsequently have to spend fixing up after I've written my first draft, because it is a very wonky, all over the place stream of consciousness exercise. So it requires a lot of work. But I find now that one of the great joys for me is to start a book and not know whether Detective Sonny Van Rensburg will appear or if she'll be the main character. And I don't know who the baddie is. And I don't know who is going to get the girl or the boy at the end of the book. And that's part of the fun for me. So when people say, I never saw that coming, that is the best thing someone can say to me, because I'll tell you what, newsflash, neither did I.
That's so good. I really love hearing people talk about that process. And yeah, recently I was at a workshop, and somebody was oh, I have to plot it, and several of the writers said, no, you don't.
No.
You do you.
Well, I mean, here's a funny thing, to take it back to Blood Trail. I mean, the premise of the book at the start is that a poacher has taken some magic and he disappears off the face of the earth in front of a worldwide TV, a live webcast. And Mia and Sanny have to deal with the fact that this chap pops up every now and then and commits a crime, and then he vanishes into thin air. And I thought, this is really cool. So I started writing this story. And then about 2/3 of the way through the book, I thought, how is this happening? Is it really magic? Well, I'm not going to tell you. You have to buy the book to work out if it's that. Because then you think, I don't know. But I have to know because I'm the writer.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Yeah, talking a bit more about your writing process, do you have particular days or of the week or times of the day that you like to write? And yeah, is it to do with, finding it energizing or exhausting? And yeah, just a bit more about your process. Yeah.
All of the above. COVID, I'm afraid to say, has been a very good time. I know a lot of people have suffered and done it really tough. Because the book industry went gangbusters last year, fiction sales were increased by something like 22% in Australia. I benefited from that with Last Survivor. It was great to see people returning to reading during the lockdowns, as unfortunate as they were. So I've been really busy. So by the end of this year, I will have written 6 books. So I've finished Blood Trail during lockdown. I'm nearly done on the first draft of a new novel. I finished a biography last year, Courage Under Fire, with the Queenslander Daniel Kieran, who was awarded the Victoria Cross in Afghanistan. So I did that. I have written another military biography, non-fiction book, which comes out in October. I am working on the story of the 97-year-old ex-Air Force digger at the moment. I'm also writing another military biography at the moment, and later this year, at the end of the year, I'll be doing a South African non-fiction book. So at the moment, Karen, my writing routine is get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and write until 7 o'clock at night. So I am literally working 12 hours a day to get my 3 books on the go finished that I'm working on at the moment. But that's unusual. So normally when I'm writing a novel or even a non-fiction book, the trick for me is to have a daily word limit, a quota. And I mean a limit because what I do is I work out how long I have. I write a novel a year. now I'm doing a couple of biographies. So I have a certain amount of time in which to write a certain amount of words. And I break that down into weeks. I write for 5 days a week. I give myself 2 days off, but I usually end up having to use those extra 2 days to catch up a little bit. And then on the days that I write, I have a word limit. So for a novel, it is 4 pages, which depending on where I'm at in the book, generally equates to about 1,600 words. Now, I must do that. But importantly, what I find works for me is I don't go over. Because some days, some days are better than others. Some days I feel like I'm on a roll and I can't stop. But I know from past experience that I have to, because the next day might be harder. I might have less time. I might not be feeling as inspired. So I always leave something in the tank. I reward myself. As soon as I finish my quota, I'll go and do something else. I'll read, or I'll do some other work, or have a meal, or go for a swim if it's summer, or if I'm in Africa, I'll go for a game drive. I try to work in the mornings. I try to write the first page before I do anything else. That's something I've cottoned on to in the last year or two, and I've been super busy. If you start the day, I'll go through the emails and I'll check Facebook and I'll see what's on Instagram. Very easily you can find it sort of 10 o'clock or so and you haven't done anything. So I try and knock that first page out as quick as I can, then maybe have a break and do something else and then get back into it. So that allows me to fall into a routine. And I hate to say it, but I think a routine is actually quite important. But again, I don't go over. I do what I have to do. And the other thing I find that really helps me is that I never finish my quota at the end of a chapter. If it happens to happen, I will write the heading, chapter 11 next, and I'll write the first sentence or the first paragraph of chapter 11, because there is nothing worse than waking up to a blank page. It is one of the most confronting things. So further, when I stop, I will quite often stop mid-sentence, so that when I wake up the next morning, the first thing I have to do is finish that sentence, and that's quite easy. You can just, and then that gets you back into the rhythm very quickly. So I hope that helps someone out there.
That's fantastic. So what's your most favourite thing and your least favourite thing about being a writer?
I think my most favourite thing is, it's probably just, my most favourite thing is I'm doing the one thing in life that I love. It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do, and I get paid for it. That's a pretty good start. The thing I like most about it is not knowing what's going to happen. And this is why I can't plot. It's just not knowing what's going to happen to these people that I have invented, people I've invested with, and where they're going to take me next. It's the flight of the imagination. And I become very wrapped up in their worlds and very wrapped up in what they're doing. And it's like getting paid to daydream. It's a great thing, writing. I love it. And I have said that if I wasn't published, I would keep writing. Or if I hadn't been published, I would still be writing something, because I'm not a particularly sporty person. I like to run. I swim badly, but I don't think a lot of us, swim because we're going to get a gold medal at the Olympics. I don't think a lot of us play tennis because we think we're going to win Wimbledon. I don't think a lot of us play footy because we think we're going to be a grand final. I reckon a lot of us do it because we like it, Now, if writing is something you like enough to think, I'm going to do it because it's fun, you're probably on a pretty good start. You're on a pretty good base. I think the thing that I don't like about it, and my wife would tell you this, is that I like to talk, Karen, and I like public speaking, and I love talking about my work in Africa. But if there's one thing that I have found that all writers have in common, is that we are a pretty insecure bunch, and you are creating. I guess artists might feel the same, or musicians, and there's a certain amount of risk in putting out your innermost feelings and your daydreams and your thoughts for the world to have a look at. And initially that's getting it past a gatekeeper, past a publisher. So I for everything I love about this job, there tends to be a counterbalance. There's a point at which I become terribly insecure. I get to around about, I can set it. It's like phases of the moon, you know, or time. I can time it with a stopwatch. I get to a certain point in the middle of the book and I think, this is rubbish. I'm never going to have enough to finish. Why didn't I start something else? Why didn't I do that other idea? And I have to tell myself, you've been doing this for 20 years now. You know, you've written 19 novels and 7 biographies. Odds are you're going to be able to finish this one, but it doesn't stop it happening. And then when I then get to the end of the book, because then I get to the end, I find I've got too many words all of a sudden. So it's incredible the way it always unfolds. Then I have to send it to my publisher, and that is probably the most agonizing time of my life, and it's happened to me 19 times. The non-fiction books tend to be contracted, so I don't feel too bad about those. But every time I submit a novel, I go through this terrible feeling of thinking it's not good enough. And I steel myself for the fact that one day it might not be good enough. But the other side of the mirror, or the darker side, is that this is a creative and I think emotional endeavour that we embark on. And anybody who's written will know that as thick-skinned as you can be, at some point somebody else has to have a look into your secret world, and it can be quite scary.
Yeah, I have interviewed a few authors, and it's very common, that fear of exposing yourself, but do it anyway. Please do it anyway.
Exactly.
So you gave us some hints about how much you're working at the moment, and it sounds like you've got a few novels on the go, but with the next one coming out, who can we expect to meet? Are we going to meet some old friends, or?
Well, I have been open about it on social media, but my other leading lady, Sonia Kurtz, is coming out of retirement. Yes, again, she's had more comebacks than Nellie Melba, old Sonia. So, and she's getting a bit creaky. She's starting to, I think time is catching up with her a bit. So her daughter is coming back to help her as well, who has appeared in a couple of previous books. So Sonia is coming back next year, as long as my publisher, if my publisher's watching, hopefully you heard my heartfelt plea before and will accept this book. But she's tackling yet another bizarre twist on the world of wildlife crime and endangered species. She's on the trail of abalone poachers in South Africa, because as happens in Australia, abalone is highly prized in both a lucrative legal and illegal market, and is being denuded. The shores of South Africa are being denuded by illegal abalone poaching, which takes her on a circuitous route through South Africa up to Zimbabwe, where she happens to spend a bit of time at Nantwich Lodge, which is a safari lodge that my wife and I may happen to have a financial interest in. So she's going on safari, and so am I, very soon.
Fantastic. That's great. So you've spoken a little bit about what you think aspiring writers could learn from, and one was Stephen King's wonderful book, which a lot of people recommend, and also, you know, that sort of getting momentum by putting some ideas down for the next day. Have you got any other advice that you'd like to give aspiring writers? People who might be watching?
I think the best advice is just do it. You know, I think it can be very, you can find a lot of excuses not to write. There are a never-ending list of excuses, and some of them seem quite valid. Research is one. You know, even I'm not saying people shouldn't go to writing groups or shouldn't undertake study, but anything that stops you from writing is not helping you. You know, so I research after I've finished. I write a first draft, and stuff I don't know, I then go away and try and find out about. I think it's good to know if you meet some other writers and have them around you, and maybe to talk to each other and critique each other's work. But at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to get your book written is if you sit down at a desk and you write a certain amount of words per day. that's my 2 cents worth. Even if it's 50 words or 100 words a day, you'll get there quicker than getting online and researching something or discussing friends the merits of plotting or not plotting. The best thing is to just get out there and do it, because that then, I think it's the more you do it, the better you get at it. Certainly read a lot. I do think, there's that good old nugget: read a lot, write a lot. I think that is a truism that I think gets overlooked a lot, and I'm guilty of it, because like I'm working on a novel, and as I said, 2 different non-fiction books at the moment. I can easily say, look, no, I'm sorry, Karen, I've got a 300-page manuscript I have to read and edit here, so I won't read. But I have to make time to read, and I'm a full-time writer. I have lots of excuses not to read. I think the more you read in the genres that you like and in the genres you want to write about, the better off you'll be. So I would say just get to work, and when you've finished working, read something every day. Stephen King does that. He's a voracious reader. I'm amazed when I reread on writing, as I do every year, just how many books he reads. So yeah, that would be the two of the most important things, I think. It is a funny old business, but at the end of the day, if you want to write a book, you've got to get down and you've got to write 80 to 120,000 words. There's no other way, no nice way to say that. Oh, sorry. The other thing I would say, which I have started doing some mentorships through the Australian Society of Authors, and what I come across is a very common thing is that once someone has written something and maybe gotten to the end of a first or a second or even a third draft, it's a very natural emotion to be worried about letting it go, sort of what we spoke about before, or they'll want to spend so much time revising and editing and rewriting. And I say to people, you just got to let it go sometime. You've got to send it to that publisher, or if you're not 100% happy with it, start something else, just, be able and ready to embark on a new project, because you might have learned. I learned a lot from my first failed manuscript, and the best thing I did was start writing another one. That is honestly the best thing I did, was just starting all over again.
That's fantastic, Tony. Well, I think we've used up just about all of the time that we had booked you for, so we probably should let you go. And again, I apologise to people who were wanting to watch the event live, but lockdowns and technology have got the better of us. So I just would say thank you to everybody who will listen to this. You can pick up Tony's books from libraries and bookshops. Blood Trail will be out next week, and you can contact Dymocks or the library to reserve your copy today. Thank you very much, Tony. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Karen, thank you very much. And I know from my previous visits to Redcliffe what a fantastic library it is and what an important part it plays in the local community. So thank you to all you do. Thanks for your support for Australian authors, and thanks to the local community of Redcliffe for their support. I would have loved to have been there in person, and hopefully I'll see you all next year.
Hopefully you'll be back. Thanks so much, Tony. Bye.
Thank you.